Hey guys, what's up? Gukill here. It's time for a new build video. In our last build video, we talked about torment farming with the Demon Hunter Unhallowed Essence set. Today we're going to talk about greater rifting with the Demon Hunter Unhallowed Essence set, and specifically solo greater rifting. Now, I know that Demon Hunters right now aren't in the greatest place as far as solo greater rifting goes. The parity between rank 1 and rank 1000 is the most significant, I think, for just about any class in Diablo right now. Yes, Demon Hunters look alright with their top ranking Demon Hunters getting rank 65 or 66, but then if we look at the leaderboards, it actually shoots all the way down as far as greater rift 57. If we take a look at other classes that are performing really well right now, Monk's top is 72 with going down to 63. So other classes are performing better than Demon Hunters, but that doesn't mean that you can't do solo greater rifts at a high level. And I'm going to show you guys the build that I use to get greater rift 60 solo with the Demon Hunter Unhallowed Essence set. Now, one thing I should put as a disclaimer right away, I know in my last video and my last guide that I posted, I did talk a lot about gear variation, skill variation. There were a lot of different things that you could do that had a lot to do with your own player preference, but in this video I'm primarily going to talk about the skills that I use and the gear that I think is extremely necessary in order to be able to clear greater F60 solo. So without further ado, let's get to talking about the gear, guys. So absolutely mandatory, guys. You can't cheat your way around this. You need to have all 6 pieces of the Unhallowed Essence set equipped. You can't cheat this by having Royal Ring of Grandeur equipped. You can't cheat this by having Royal Ring of Grandeur in your cube. You need to have all of the pieces of this set. You need to combine them with focus and restraint. Preferably you want your focus and restraint to have dexterity, crit damage, crit chance with a socket. But if you're going to have a different focus or restraint, you want to make sure that you have the crit damage on it, because crit damage is something that we're not able to get a lot of because we don't dual wield weapons. But ideally, for high level greater rifting, you're going to want to have focus and restraint with dex, crit hit damage, and crit hit chance for optimal damage. You want to have Hunter's Wrath as a legendary belt. You can try Witching Hour, but ultimately it's not going to have the same effect for you. You're going to deal less damage overall, because when you're doing high level greater rifts, you are actually using your generator, I would say about 60 to 70% of the time. I know that seems weird because the build is based around spamming multi-shot, but ultimately, we'll talk about playstyle a little bit later, but when you're using your generator as often as you are, you need to have Hunter's Wrath to deal more damage and to get your hatred back faster, as well as having Wraps of Clarity in your bracer slot so that you have a constant damage reduction buff on your character. Demon Hunters are extremely squishy, guys, and if you do not have those 2 pieces combined, you're really going to struggle. You're really going to feel like you have to make absolutely 0 mistakes in a greater rift in order to clear it at all. Another necessary part of the build, you need to have a Dead Man's Legacy that has maximum discipline rolled in its secondary slot, and making sure that it has multi-shot damage on it. Dead Man's Legacies are pretty tough to roll perfectly, especially when you get your Ancient one. Finally you get it, and then you notice that, oh, it has a stat that I'm not very excited about. But as long as you have discipline and multi-shot damage on it, you're going to be okay. Yang's recurve is the other bit of it. Multi-shot attacks 50% faster. You need to have discipline as a secondary. You need to have resource costs. That's pretty much a given. The higher damage that you can get, the better, but don't sacrifice a secondary roll. Don't sacrifice don't sacrifice a stat that's really important in order to just maximize your damage out. Think about the overall character that you're going to be using, right? You need to have discipline. You need to have, as much damage as you can kind of get, but you also need to make sure your resource costs are in a good spot. And maybe if you have that decision to make where you go, you know what, my bow has 3100 damage, I'm really struggling in greater rifts, maybe I need to get vitality as a roll on this instead of going full board for damage. So that's really a wiggle spot, but if you don't have discipline on your bow, it's broken and you need to get a new one. The last bit here that I would highly recommend, yeah, you might be able to get away with a resist amulet, but ultimately, guys, Hellfire amulets are much easier to get in Season 4. Spend the time, farm the machines, craft one. You ideally want to have one with dexterity, crit damage, and crit chance. I know that there's going to be some variation with people who go for the elemental damage, but this has been the one that's performed the best for me. And then you want to make sure it has one of 4 main passives that you need for the build, which I will talk about right now as we dive a little bit into skills. So, if we dive into skills here, The main 4 passives that you need to have are Ballistics, Awareness, Ambush, and Call of the Weak. So if your Hellfire Amulet has any of those passives on it, you are golden, because then you can make the 5th passive on your character Steady Aim. You could also have Steady Aim on your Hellfire Amulet, but maybe you're somebody that wants to try different skills out, and in that case, you're not going to be able to try different skills out because you're going to be forced to have Call of the Weak in this slot. So getting any one of those 4 that I talked about allows some wiggle room. Instead of Steady Aim, you could go with Perfectionist, for example, reducing discipline costs and giving you a little bit more of a damage buff. Or not damage buff, sorry, a defensive buff. You could go with Archery for pure damage, but ultimately that's going to perform a little bit less than Steady Aim. You can go for Tactical Advantage if you feel like you really need some extra speed, so there's a little bit better options there. Leech is a good option as well for the amount that you're hitting. Maybe you're struggling a lot with Reflex All packs, but that's kind of your wiggle room with passives. And then for skills, the skills that I use to clear my radar 60, I used Evasive Fire. I know there's been people that have used Entangling Shot or have used Bola Shot, and that's fine, that works, but for me I used Evasive Fire because I felt that it hit the most mobs for the most damage, and it also regenerated my Hatred faster than any other skill that I tested with. Multi-Shot, you're going to want to use the Fire Arsenal rune. Preparation, Invigoration is absolutely mandatory. Increasing your discipline increases your damage. Vault, Trail of Cinders is going to be our bread and butter when it comes to applying Mark for Death and pulling mobs in, as well as Caltrops in combination with that. And I'll show you guys a little bit how that works later on in the video. And then for Companion, you're going to want to make sure that you have either Wolf or Bat. I prefer Wolf. I had Bat there just because I had just finished running some farming routes, but I like having Wolf for when you really need to burst down that elite pack as fast as possible. Pop your cooldown, give yourself that 30% increased damage. It's a great tool to use. That covers the build, more or less. We'll talk a little bit about gems, guys. You're going to want to make sure that you have an Amethyst in your helm. The 23% life is critical for toughness. You don't really need cooldown reduction. There's no real reason to have your Wolf Companion constantly coming up, and you're not going to be using prep that often. And experience, obviously, if you're talking about just wanting to clear as high a grade rift as possible, experience doesn't really make a difference. So the Amethyst is the way to go. You're going to want to have Dexterity gems in all of your item slots here, and as well as your weapon. And then when it comes to Legendary gems, I use Bane of the Trapped, which is a no-brainer. It's the best damage gem in the game. I use Bane of the Stricken because, trust me, you're going to wind up in runs where you have maybe only a minute or a minute 15 seconds left, and that Rift Guardian time is crucial. This also works when you get into that particularly nasty group of mobs. You're constantly attacking, and you're constantly creating stacks of damage increase against those enemies. And then Zay's Stone of Vengeance, because we don't want to be too close to the action, and the further away you are, the more damage that you're gonna hit. And with this particular rank, at a maximum range, I'm doing 35% increased damage, which is absolutely massive when you consider combining that with Steady Aim, where if you have no enemies, you're at range, your damage is increased by 20%. That's a pretty big damage boost, and that's exactly what we want to go for. On your follower, you're going to want to make sure you have some critical items here. You're going to absolutely need to make sure that you have the Follower Cannot Die Templar Relic. You're going to want to make sure that you have Thunder Fury, because this is how your Templar is going to spread Bane of the Trapped. You're going to want to make sure you have Freeze of Deflection, because your Templar blocking attacks is going to give it a chance to freeze an enemy, which is a huge CC for your run. And then S of Johan. The way that I kind of wound up using this is I would make sure I get close to mobs, get the Templars right in front of them, then I would just watch the Templar continually group them together, which was super awesome for being able to multi-shot them down. So this is, I think, absolutely critical for your Templar to have. The last bit we'll talk about here, guys, is Canized Cube. And I think that these are all non-negotiables. You need to have Calamity. Enemies becoming marked for death, giving them 20% increased damage taken, is absolutely critical for the build. You need Cinder Coat in order to be able to reduce all of your resource costs. And then you also need your Convention of Elements. This is where your big damage is going to come into play, because it's about 20% uptime of you critting initially without Convention of Elements. You're going to be critting for about 1.1, 1.2 billion. And then with the fire buff up, you're going to be critting for 4 or 5 billion, and it's when that fire buff is up that you really want to be absolutely spraying your multi-shot as much as possible. Alright guys, and then the last thing to show you is we've got our gear, we've got our skills in order. The last thing to go over is the actual playstyle of what you're going to be doing when you're inside the Greater Rift. Now, I'm not going to actually demo this for you guys on Greater Rift 60 Plus, as I know that the build is advertised for, simply because I want to be able to show you guys how your different skills are going to synergize. And it's better to give you guys examples of the mechanics while using them in a Greater Rift for you guys to try out for yourselves. So basically, there's a couple things that we have to know about the Greater Rift. One, the level itself actually makes a difference. So for example, this kind of map can actually be a big struggle for demon hunters, because as you go out into the open space, you're going to wind up in a scenario where you might be getting attacked from all different areas. Demon hunters don't have a particularly great way of dealing with this right now. So the best kind of maps to get are the ones where there is lots of abilities for you to lane and tunnel monsters into an area where you can hit them with multi-shot and you can use your Templar to shield them. This map I actually wouldn't say is a great map, but it's definitely not the worst map that you could get. So obviously as we progress through the Rift, we want to be able to kind of see what we're dealing with first, what the mob types are. So we can see this is a pretty good mob type to get, is we're getting melee mobs here. Now, a way that I would usually do it is I would start off by hitting my evasive fire. This gets my buff up here, which is going to allow me to have reduced damage taken. I would then try and vault through as many things as I can get, you know, without putting myself in too much harm's way, so that I can apply Marked for Death with my Trail of Cinders. I would evasive fire and kind of do my best here to drop some caltrops to kind of start to CC monsters and slow them down. If your Templar's item is proccing greatly, it'll pull these together, and then when you have Fire Convention up, that's when you really spray out your multi-shot. And that's pretty much the way that you go through the Rift. Obviously, the mobs that you get will dictate how your run is going to go. So as you can see here, I'm going to vault in, going to drop a few caltrops just to slow people down, and then I'm going to start throwing out some evasive fires mixed with multi-shots just to kind of start to roll damage through different monsters. As I can see now, I have my cold up, so I know fire is coming next, and then this is when I'm going to start really going to town on these monsters. And there you go. You want to be able to be in a good place where you can actually hit monsters from off of the screen. That is where you're going to be in your best place. Demon Hunters do have the advantage of having multi-shot, where their ability is actually able to hit lots of things while they're off the screen. That is a huge advantage, because in a lot of cases you're going to be able to take out monsters before they're actually able even to get close to you. And that's pretty much it. This isn't the greatest density Rift, but it is important to try and work your way through. Now, I did get a lot of feedback in regards to going through greater Rifts, especially higher level greater Rifts. Yellows are the bane of you. Yellows are really going to mess your day up. I've been told by a lot of people, yeah, you know what, just skip the yellows, but I can honestly say that it is very difficult as a demon hunter to be able to skip mobs, especially when you're dealing with a Rift level where you have a lot of density, because you're just going to continue vaulting into places where you're going to be surrounded by monsters, and it's going to make it really hard on your life, because you are going to try and find that spot like we're kind of dealing with right now, where you can hit monsters from the edge of the screen, you're at max distance, and you're just never really able to settle down as you go through your map. So hopefully those tips and tricks help you guys. I really wish that I had captured the video of myself actually doing Greater Rift 60, but there is a video of me doing it almost clear, using essentially the same tactics. I think I might have been using 1 or 2 different skills, but that's it. Is basically you need to do everything in your power to not get hit by monsters, stay at max range, make sure you're applying Mark for Death, make sure you're grouping up your monsters together, and then just unloading your multi-shots, and you should do just fine. As you can see with the gear that I'm using, Greater Rift 50 is pretty much a non-issue solo, as I'd spent a lot of time explaining what we were doing, and now we're spending most of our time just absolutely blowing through things. The one thing I will explain is Wolf Companion, which I just activated here. It's a big cooldown ability if you need that extra damage boost, especially if you have a lot of mobs in the same area. You definitely want to be able to work hard to kind of cluster them all up, and then be able to pop your cooldown and then start spraying away your multi-shot That's what is going to be your biggest damage boost for you. A couple other things to go through. Pylons. Pylons make a big difference, especially in high-level greater rifts. You're going to need a conduit and probably a power pylon, but shield pylons are also invaluable to demon hunters. If you get a shield pylon, that is actually going to give you the ability to skip mobs, or at least put yourself in a position where you can just stand in place and be able to burst things down. The one thing that demon hunters do have a great advantage of is that multi-shot absolutely wrecks, especially when Convention of Elements is up with the fire element boost. Even at greater of 60, 61, 62, when you have your fire up, you should be able to do billions of damage, taking off huge chunks of health. So when you get a shield pylon, being in a situation where you're actually able to just stand there and fire off your shots and not have to worry about getting hit for ridiculous amounts of damage, which happens in greater of 60 plus, you are going to be in a much better position than you were before. So shield is a great pylon to get. The worst pylon to get is speed, and unfortunately there's just no real way to talk about it. You move faster, which is nice, but at the end of the day, it just doesn't do the same trick as the other ones. If you don't get a pylon in your rift, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to kill the monsters in time. Unfortunately, with greater rift 60s especially, demon hunters really need the added just time to be able to be more careful as they're progressing through their rifts. There isn't a lot of wiggle room to make mistakes when you're in a greater rift as a demon hunter. You want to minimize your mistakes and really minimize your res timer. I would say getting through probably the first 20-25% without a death would be a great start for your progression. When we talk about fishing rifts, this is something that is a little bit more, I would say, advanced, just because, well, most people join their rift and they just start clearing it, and that's just the way the game works. But unfortunately, when it comes to demon hunters, sometimes the mob types can just be an instant, you know that this isn't going to go well. So when you're trying to fish for rifts, you're really trying to fish for monsters that you're going to be able to keep at range, that aren't going to be able to jump you. So ghosts and leapers from Act 2 and Act 5, they're definitely the worst types to get. I would also say actually getting some of the fallen shamans and soul rippers are really bad to get as well. If they're mixed with enough melee mobs that you think you can fight your way through it, then good, more power to you, but most of the time it's better off for you to just reset the rift, and by resetting it I mean leaving the game and then starting a new one, because it's definitely not worth pulling your hair out and dying repeatedly. For example, this level on greater rift 60 would probably cause me to just instantly quit the game. The other thing is that as far as elite affixes go, reflex damage is really the big one that's going to wind up wrecking you. Reflex damage has actually caused my greater rift runs to stop just right there. It's very, very hard for you to work around reflex damage, and in my opinion, it's better to work with Vault than it is to work with Smokescreen, which is how you would try and get around reflex damage, but at the end of the day, it's going to end up hurting you a lot, and you're probably going to die a few times. When it comes to the Rift Guardian, this is where demon hunters really, really excel. They're able to deal huge amounts of damage, especially when the Rift Guardian actually gets below the amount of health for your Dead Man's Legacy. I have gotten the Rift Guardian with a minute left and been able to clear it. I've gotten the Rift Guardian with a minute and a half left and been able to still have 40 seconds of time. Just all depends on your positioning. There is no real Rift Guardian that causes a great issue for demon hunters, as long as you're making sure you're positioning yourself well. I hope this video helps you guys with your progress. I definitely spent a lot of time trying to get greater of 60, guys. It takes a lot of work, but you can do it, and you can even go farther. There are demon hunters out there that have used Unhallowed Essence to get even higher greater rift scores, and it's something that I'm going to be trying, and hope that I can capture it for you guys and show you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this guide. There is an actual link in the description taking you to the written out guide should you guys want to use it as a reference. Good luck with your greater rifting, guys, and I'll catch you next time.